We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
33-year-old Bernard Hugh Walden was not the archetypal murderer. He was an assistant lecturer in physics at Rotherham Technical College. He became besotted with 21-year-old Joyce Moran, who worked as a clerk in the administration office. Joyce only had eyes for a former student, someone of her own age, and this was 20-year-old Neil Saxton. She had earlier turned down Walden's proposal of marriage, and even laughed at it. Walden is alleged to have said of the rejection, "This was the first nail in her coffin." On the morning of Tuesday, April the 7th, 1959, Walden spotted Joyce talking to Neil in one of the corridors. He said nothing to them, but quietly went to his locker and retrieved his revolver. He returned to the corridor in silent fury and shot Neil once, fatally wounding him. He wanted to save the bullets for Joyce. He shot her twice, she fell to the floor, and he put a further 3 bullets into her back to make sure she was dead. Walden then walked calmly out of the building and got into his car and drove off. For the next 24 days, he eluded a nationwide manhunt, despite his heavy limp caused by contracting polio as a teenager. The Ford Prefect car was later found abandoned in Leeds. Finally, he was found by a policeman, who spotted him lying asleep on a bench in Forbury Gardens, Reading. It was reported that Walden had shut himself off from his family because he thought of himself as a failure, because he had left university with only a third-class degree instead of a first-class honours one. Walden blamed this failure on the sudden death of his mother and the attack of polio. He had taken various teaching jobs, but became increasingly embittered. Walden was tried in Sheffield before Mr. Justice Paul. As there was no question of fact, which is a question concerning the reality of an alleged event or circumstance in a trial by jury, the defence plea was insanity. Mr. Scott stated that the issue was one of diminished responsibility, a defence allowed under the Homicide Act of 1957. To this end, evidence was given by consultant psychiatrist Dr. James Valentine, who said that Walden was suffering from chronic paranoid development and was grossly abnormal. This was rebutted by Dr. Frazier, who concluded that the crime was one motivated simply by jealousy. Walden testified, although it didn't help his case. He told the court, "I am not as other men. I am a cripple, and must be armed to put me on fair terms with others. I have an absolute right to kill." The jury were not impressed by this explanation, and took just 20 minutes to convict him. He was removed to the condemned suite at Armley Prison in Leeds. His appeal was dismissed on the 27th of July, and he was hanged by Harry Allen, assisted by Thomas Cunliffe at 9 a.m. on Friday the 14th of August 1959. Walden was 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 159 pounds. As Allen hooded Walden, the prisoner wet himself. This disconcerted Cunliffe, and the prisoner was dropped with unstrapped legs. Allen gave him a drop of 7 feet exactly, and this was sufficient to cause fracture, dislocation of the neck vertebrae. The execution form described him as spare but muscular, and noted that there was rupture of the muscles on the right side of the neck. It was also noted that Thomas Cunliffe was nervous and fumbling, and did not recommend him for future executions. He was removed from the Home Office list. "12-year-old Janet Mary Warner had decided to take her dog Rex for a walk along Aylstone Canal in Blaby, Leicestershire, on Friday, the 22nd of May, 1953. In Bluebank Spinney, which is a hiking area, she was suddenly attacked by Joseph Christopher Reynolds, an Irish labourer. The murder was witnessed by 2 young boys and a girl playing in the woods near Cork Lane in Blaby. The trio were hiding up a tree as the terrible scene unfolded. The girl was 8-year-old Sue Johnston, who, under the name Sue Townsend, would go on to write the diary of Adrian Mole. The post-mortem, conducted by Dr. Donald Handley, confirmed that Janet's death was due to strangulation, with a silk stocking and her school tie knotted around her neck, but also ruled out any sexual assault. Joseph Reynolds was a jobless labourer from Dublin, who lived in lodgings at Uppingham Road in Leicester. His landlady had reported him missing, and described him as quiet, clean and tidy. Joseph Christopher Reynolds was born in Dublin in 1922. Educated by the Christian Brothers, he later joined the Irish Army in 1939. After his discharge, he went on to join the RAF and arrived in England in 1943. He was casually employed at the time of the killing. He was described as soft-spoken, polite, shy, and a loner who rarely drank. At first I was going to kill a man who used to go past at a certain hour every day, but the day I killed Janet, he did not come that way. I was just leaving when I saw the girl coming through the wood with a dog. I suggested that we go rabbiting. Reynolds took Janet Warner into the woods, caught hold of her and attacked her. She began to scream, so I beat her with me hands and feet, he told police. I had a mixture of feelings. I could not stop. I saw the stocking with which I was meant to strangle her, lying on the ground. I picked it up and tied it around her neck to make sure she was dead. The two boys and the girl previously mentioned had heard a girl screaming that evening near the canal. When they approached the area, they saw Reynolds running away and reported to police that they had seen a man with untidy dark hair, a broken nose, and overalls buttoned to his chin. Upon finding her body, police dispatched hundreds of officers, special constables, and tracker dogs in the area to find her killer. Roads were closed within a 30-mile radius of the crime scene. A light aircraft was dispatched to search for lone figures crossing farmland or woods on foot. It was through door-to-door inquiries the following day that finally led police to Reynolds' door. He was apprehended at an address in Belvoir Street, Leicester, where he was arrested on the 25th of May, 1953. The soft-spoken Irishman made no attempt to hide himself or deny his crime, and admitted to police in his first interview that he was the one responsible for the murder of Janet Warner. He further told police he deserved to die for killing the 12-year-old. Reynolds said that he had decided to kill someone just days prior to the murder on May the 22nd. In his statement to police, which was later read out in court, he said, "For the past 10 days or so, I've had a feeling to kill somebody. I waited my chance along the canal at Ayleston." Reynolds appeared in Leicestershire County Magistrates Court on Monday the 25th, where he was remanded in custody to stand trial. He told the police that Janet had fought hard for her life, and that the little girl was very brave in the face of death. I hope when my time comes I'll be half as brave. Reynolds pleaded guilty at his trial at Leicestershire Assizes before Mr. Justice Pilcher on the 26th of October 1953. Judge Pilcher tried to tell Reynolds to heed his defense team's advice and allow them to mount a case of insanity. However, Reynolds wouldn't hear of it and declared that since he intended to kill someone, he intended to pay the price for it. When asked if he had anything to say, he is reported to have said, "I deserve the extreme punishment for my crime. I can only say I'm happy to meet my death." This was one of the shortest ever murder trials. The Leicester Evening Mail reported that his trial was the shortest on record at the time, clocking in at just 4 minutes. He received the mandatory death sentence. As he bowed his head in silent prayer, he had the black cap placed over his face and was led from the courtroom. He became the last man to be hanged in Welford Road Prison in Leicester, and was executed by Albert Pierpoint and Robert Leslie Stewart on Tuesday, the 17th of November, 1953. The execution form states that there was linear marking of the neck with surrounding bruising, superficial laceration on the underside of the lower jaw on the left side. Presumably this was where the eyelet of the noose had been positioned. 300 people had gathered outside the prison to see the notices of execution posted. It was noted for the record that Reynolds had served a prison term for grievous bodily harm when he had stabbed a woman. He was 31 years old and never gave a reason for his actions. "22-year-old John Thomas Rogers was a barman at the Northwood Hotel on Green Lane in Northwood, Middlesex. One of his co-workers was 25-year-old Lillian Maud Chamberlain, who lived in a flat across the road from the hotel. She was married, and her husband Ivan worked as a restaurant car attendant on the LMS railway. This often took him away nights, as was the case on Wednesday the 25th of August, 1937. That Wednesday happened to be a half-day off for Rogers, and it's probable he would have known that Lillian's husband would be away the whole night. The following morning, Lillian did not report for work, and another employee was sent across the road to find her. He was shocked to discover her badly beaten body, wearing only her nightdress. The famous pathologist, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, ascertained that death had been caused by strangulation. Suspicion was raised when Rogers didn't show up for work on the Thursday and was nowhere to be found. The police circulated a description of him to the press. 2 busmen who knew Rogers spotted him at Golders Green Underground Station. One kept him talking while the other went for the police. He was arrested on the spot. Interviewed later, he told police that he'd gone to Ruislip, and when he returned to the hotel, it was locked up for the night. Knowing that Lillian lived across the road, he went to her flat, intending to ask if he could sleep the night there. He claims he found the door open and discovered her brutalized. He also claims she was still alive when he found her, and he got blood on his clothes as he held her in his arms. He took the bloodied clothes off and borrowed some of her husband's clothes before disposing of his own. Rogers came to trial at the Old Bailey on the 18th and 19th of October 1937, before Mr. Justice Charles. He continued to maintain his innocence and the highly unlikely story he had told police. Mr. J.B. McClure, for the prosecution, asked him why he did not call an ambulance for Lillian, to which he replied, "With me it's self first, self last, and self always." The jury considered that forthright statement, and after 2 hours reached a guilty verdict, but they added a recommendation for mercy on account of Rogers' age. It was reported on Monday the 25th of October that Rogers would appeal, but this was later withdrawn. Mercy was not forthcoming, and Rogers was hanged at Pentonville Prison on Thursday the 18th of November 1937. The execution was carried out by Thomas Pierpoint, assisted by Henry Pollard. Rogers had been engaged to be married to a Miss Irene Scott. In February 1938, she married Rogers' brother, Matthew. He had never gotten to know his father, because when he was just 4 years old, his mother had cut his throat. She was convicted of manslaughter and died in 1925. Well, my dear friends, we know the official verdict on these cases, but what was your verdict? Regarding the first case, was he suffering from chronic paranoid development, or was it simply a case of jealousy? Well, you can't be entirely normal to go and shoot 2 people in cold blood, can you? I would say definitely that the situation provoked extreme jealousy in him. He was frustrated from years of bitterness and insecurity, and he had set his heart on this woman. She rejected him, and that was the final straw. An insecure and immature personality who couldn't cope with the realities of life. But I would say he definitely knew what he was doing. This wasn't a case of diminished responsibility. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was furious that this woman rejected him, and I would say that he was aiming too high. If he had set his sights a little lower, he would have found someone. But no, he, in his arrogance, thought that he deserved someone young and pretty, and when his reality wasn't her reality, that's when he snapped. And the second case, the Irishman, just very strange. I suspect that he was experiencing the onset of schizophrenia, which is about that age. He was definitely in the age group for it. He had no reason to murder her. There was no motive. It was not robbery. It was not sexual assault. He just had these thoughts that he wanted to kill someone. He didn't look like a violent person, and by all accounts from the landlady and other people that knew him, he was a teetotaler, quiet-spoken. It just seems entirely senseless, doesn't it? Very weird, very strange. Those sort of cases are unsettling because we really don't know why they occur. What motivates someone to do something like that? And apparently the guy that he was gonna murder, the person that used to walk along that track, he was notified that he was going to be the victim, and he obviously felt very lucky that he wasn't there that day. My goodness. And the third case with the young man, also very tragic. Was that a spur-of-the-moment thing? Did she reject his advances? We can never know his personality. We're just getting little bits of information passed down. What was his behavior normally around people, around women? We don't know that. But he didn't seem like a bad-looking young man. That's also a strange case where we don't know the full details. Tragic. His own father had been killed by his mother. That's obviously going to have an effect on his personality growing up. Did he have some sort of brief affair with this young woman, and she wanted to end it. And as I say, it's all conjecture. We will never know. But the fellow pictured here in this thumbnail image, that is Albert Pierpoint, the executioner. For those overseas who have never heard of him before, he was a very famous executioner for the Home Office in England. And we're going to jump over now to the internet to have a quick look at a few facts about Albert Pierpoint. Here we go. So this is from the Manchester Evening News.co.uk, the pub landlord who killed over 400 people. And there we have Mr. Albert Pierpoint relaxing in his garden home in 1974. So, yeah, quite a strange side profession, owning a pub and being the clinical state executioner. But the strange story that I wanted to share with you was that, we're going to get past all that about his upbringing, but he prided himself on delivering a quick, dignified and humane death. He was also involved in the execution of the Nuremberg war trials, and his family had been, I think his father had been an executioner, or his grandfather, but it was definitely in the family. Does it say anywhere there? His younger brother was Thomas Pierpoint, who we also mentioned during the presentation. Yeah. And the father, I was right, yeah, the father had been an executioner before him. That's right. So there he is on his honeymoon. So this was the pub he owned, Help the Poor Struggler. I love that name. Isn't that great? I love those old English pubs. They're all disappearing, unfortunately. So the story I wanted to share with you, and by the way, that pub has been pulled down in the 90s to make way for a motorway. Oh dear. So all the locals knew that he was a hangman, and they would go to visit him in the pub. There was one guy, there we have him there, serving behind the bar. Here we go. Before closing time at the Help the Poor Struggler, Albert would sing Danny Boy. He had a fine voice, and was usually joined in the sing-along at the piano, a fixture in post-war pubs, by a man who called him Tosh, who he called Tish in return. That was a common sort of nickname for people who didn't really know each other intimately. They were sort of acquaintances, so it was quite common for people to call one Tosh and the other would return with Tish. So one night Tish, whose real name was James Corbett, left the pub and did something which he had been brooding on for a year. In a hotel room in Ashton-under-Lyne, Corbett strangled Eliza Wood, his sometime girlfriend, to death in August 1950. Corbett, then in his 30s, would be sentenced to hang for that murderous act of jealousy. In his cell at Strangeways, awaiting the walk to the gallows, he was met by a familiar face. "Hello, Tosh," Corbett said, looking up at the man who had been sent to execute him. "Hello, Tish. How are you?" replied Albert. Later in his memoirs, Albert recalled the encounter, writing how the condemned man smiled and relaxed after he greeted him with the usual warmth of my nightly greeting from behind the bar. It must have been strange. Must have been strange, wasn't it? You know, that someone who you've sang along with and you know, and they're one of your locals, and you have to execute them. I know that stuck with him for the rest of his life. He couldn't really accept that he had to, hang this person who he knew. And in the end, in his later years, he didn't think that execution was a deterrent to crime. He reckoned it solved nothing. What do you think? There is no actual photo of the guy Corbett, the murderer, but I have found an early photo of him when he was married, his first marriage, not with the woman that he actually murdered. I'll just show you that in a minute. I have to change the format of this page. Yeah, but here he wrote in his memoirs, Albert wrote about his feelings after Corbett's execution. "I thought if any man had a deterrent to murder poised before him, it was this troubadour whom I called Tish. He was not only aware of the rope, he had the man who handled it beside him singing a duet. The deterrent did not work." Albert recalled Corbett's final moments thus: "At 20 seconds to 9 the next morning, I went into the death cell. He seemed under a great strain, but I did not see stark fear in his eyes. only a more childlike worry. He was anxious to be remembered and to be accepted. "Hello, Tosh," he said, not very confidently. "Hello, Tish," I said. "How are you?" I was not effusive, just gave the usual casual warmth of my nightly greeting from behind the bar. Pierpoint goes on to describe how Corbett smiled and relaxed after this greeting. After strapping Corbett's arms, Pierpoint says, "Come on, Tish, old chap," at which Corbett goes to the gallows lightly. I would say that he ran. Very sad. It's almost like this Corbett, in the act that he committed, the act of murder, he knew that execution was going to be the outcome, the result. And just the fact that Albert Pierpoint didn't sort of condemn him personally, it was the usual greeting, that relaxed him. That sort of, he seemed almost accepting after that. Very sad. So I'll just change the format so we can have a look at the photo of the victim and the murderer. So this is the only known image of the murderer. The Mr. Corbett, and that's with his first wife. Yeah, and it's just a blurry image, but unfortunately we don't have anything clearer than that. And this is the photo of the victim where he had written whore on her forehead. Yeah, the fact that he had planned this and she had no idea of his thoughts, that's quite horrific, isn't it? I never know. I don't understand people who can't just move on, just think, is it worth dying for? Or going to prison for the rest of your life? Just, end the relationship and move on. That's always been my philosophy. I don't really understand that mindset, but there are people like that who the rejection just sets something off in them. Very strange. Well, I'd love to know your thoughts on those 3 cases that I've just presented. I do hope that spring is starting to make an appearance in your part of the world. Here it did on the weekend and then disappeared abruptly, and now we've got horrible cold grey weather again. It's probably just going to get really hot suddenly without a nice spring interlude. Alright, can't think of anything to say, so I will say goodbye. Take care and God bless. Bye bye, my friends.